Joy and I are here with Robert Q Mathews. We are so pleased to talk to him today. He was the men's costume supervisor under Moonlighting's head designer, Robert Tudorese. And he will share with us what it was like to work on the series, beginning with the pilot through the season 3 episode, It's a Wonderful Job. And after that, we will we have questions submitted by our Facebook group, Moonlighting 21, and Joy and I will ask those questions after Robert gives us an outline on his task there at Moonlighting on the set.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, let me start out with how I got the job. I was working on a television series at MGM called Paper Dolls, and I got a call on my answering machine from the head of the costume department, John Perry, mentioning that the people I had done a pilot with earlier in the year, Glenn Caron and Jay Daniel, were doing another pilot with Robert Tudorese, and did I want to come and join them? So I did. And ABC Circle Films, by the way, was the in-house production company for ABC Television at the time. So this was one of their first pilots they were ever doing. I started the pilot in, I want to say, late August or early September of 1984. And Cybill Shepherd had already been cast. Because she was cast and her deal was made within like a week or 10 days of being on the pilot, Robert and the woman's costumer at that time, Yvonne, got as many of her clothes together as they could, and they did a fitting with her, and she was pretty well done. We still didn't have the character of David Addison, and that's quite a story in itself. Glenn Caron got Bruce Willis, found him, and wanted him, and the network felt he was a little too edgy. They wanted to go with somebody that was more tried and true. I think Robert Hayes was the actor that they were asking for. Eventually, Glenn got them to agree to a camera test, but without Cybill Shepherd. So there is the famous camera test that Bruce did with another actress. Having done that, the network still said no. Bruce went away and he did a guest spot on Miami Vice. And while he was gone, they kept looking for men. We kept waiting. They kept postponing. I didn't think the pilot was ever going to get done. Bruce got back in town from having worked on Miami Vice, and Glenn got them to finally commit to doing a camera test with Cybill Shepherd. He was really staunch that that was who he wanted, was Bruce Willis. So the network agreed. I remember distinctly being in the costume department, and Jay Daniel and Bob, the director, and Glenn Caron came downstairs to costumes, took me aside and said, "We need you to go shopping. We need you to get some clothes together for Bruce. We're going to shoot a test with him tomorrow," and Cybill. It was frightening for me because these guys were all tall, they were all big, and I was a short, little, skinny guy. And it was one of the first times I'd had that job on a show. I was fortunate that the head of the costume department, John Perry, happened to be in the building at that time. And he was seasoned. He looked like the gay version of Johnny Carson at the time. He wore a shirt and tie, he wore a navy sport coat, gray slacks, he wore Gucci shoes, he was very stylish. And he saw what was going on, and he joined in. And he said to the producer, to Jay and Glenn and Bob, he said, "That's okay, bring him down. I'm going to take him shopping. Bobby and I will take him shopping." So they got Bruce, and John drove a Rolls Royce. That's the kind of guy he was. And it wasn't an old Rolls Royce. It was a fairly new one. And he threw Bruce and I in that Rolls Royce and drove us a few blocks away to the local Neiman Marcus. We went shopping for Bruce. We got him a leather jacket and I think a sport shirt or a sweater and some slacks. And I think we got a sport coat shirt, tie, slack outfit, brought it back to ABC, had it altered. And the next day we did the 2 tests, the one in the kitchen. I think it was in the kitchen. He breaks into the kitchen and all that. They have their dialogue. There was another one where the 2 of them were dancing. And I always thought it was in a bar, but I think that scene got added to an episode later on. But it was a really touching scene. I think it was a really long day. I think we shot for like 22 hours that day with Bruce and Cybill. Literally the next day, they edited it together and they showed it to the network. And the network, like within a day or so, approved Bruce and we were off and running on the pilot. And it was difficult because we had a really small costume department. It was Robert Turturese and Susie Swain at that point, and myself. And that was it. We were the costume department. And Robert Turturese was doing two or three other shows at the time, one of which was in San Francisco. But we got off and running on the pilot. And it was really interesting because one of the first things we shot was the sequence, the guy with the mohawk when he's chasing the jogger. Mm-hmm. We shot that, I think, the first day of shooting. And it was just interesting. It was really hard because it was just the two of us. When we got to the segment of the show where we were at the Bonaventure Hotel, where they're at the elevator and Cybill is with her date in the bar restaurant and Bruce breaks in on the date, that whole sequence, it was kind of shot in two segments. The lobby of the hotel was open to us through the evening. And then the restaurant on the top of the hotel closed at midnight. So we weren't allowed access until after midnight to get up there. So we would get everybody dressed and shoot everything in the hotel that we could do. And then at midnight, we would switch everybody over and we would go up to the restaurant and we would do the sequences there. Because it was just Susie and myself, I would help her get everybody set for the afternoon work, take a nap, help her get everybody set for the midnight work, sleep in the wardrobe trailer, get up in the morning, help her wrap, go home, go to bed, get up, take a shower, and go shopping for the things that we needed, go to the office and do paperwork, go back to the set in the afternoon and start all over again. That was how that whole thing happened on the pilot with just the two of us. It was really challenging, but I was 28 years old and I was up for it. Mm-hmm. I want to talk a little bit about Bruce's look, because I've noticed that on the Facebook page, people are asking things about his look and did he like his clothes. It was interesting. The network felt that he was edgy. Now, having not been told that myself, this is what Glenn and Jay were communicating to Robert and to myself. And the network's words were soften him up, soften him up. And Robert took that to be use soft textures, use soft colors, everything softer. Bruce, having been in Miami on Miami Vice and seeing the cutting edge fashion forward clothes that those guys were wearing, that was really how he wanted to look, because that was much more like he in real life. Mm-hmm. And I think how he wanted to come across on the show. So we were faced with always having to use muted colors, soft textures. We were afraid of his height in comparison to Cybill, because when we did the pilot and the first 5, she was still wearing high-heeled shoes. Not terribly high, but still high-heeled shoes. That was why we gave him those boots that have come up in comments, and people have noticed over the years, that we used on him in the pilot. While we did season 1 in regards to his look, it was really kind of a testing ground for us to try different things. And I think we learned, when I look back at those episodes and I glance through them, I can see a little bit morphing in there. And I feel like when we got into season 2 is when we really came up to speed with understanding what his look was going to be like. Mm-hmm. But the bottom line was Bruce was not terribly happy with his look. He wanted a much more cutting edge look. When I look back on the show and I look at the two of them together, I'm really happy that the network and Glenn and everybody stuck to their guns, because I think that his performance and the dynamic between the two of them, with the look he has compared to the character he portrays, I think it really works. And I think it adds a really great dynamic to the story and to the show. I wanted to also talk about, while we were doing the pilot, Cybill had that black dress with those magnolia flowers on the shoulder. That dress was by a fashion designer named Victor Costa, and he had a line of cocktail dresses at the time that was very popular. And Robert found that dress. And the interesting thing was, when he brought it in, the magnolias were up here on the shoulder. That was the way the dress was designed originally to be worn. And Robert made sure that when they did the fitting, that those got moved down to the side of the shoulder. That was like a big thing for him.
Mhm.
In fact, Robert had a saying that he would always tell Susie and I, never look at something for what it is, but look at something for what it can become. That was sort of a motto with him. And I've never forgotten it. And he did it many, many times over the course of the show. And he did it really brilliantly. I'm going to have a short sip of coffee here, if that's okay.
Mhm.
I want to talk about a funny night we had while we were doing the sequence in Cybill's house and we were in Bel Air. A costume trailer was parked down at the bottom of the hill. That house was you had to go up a bunch of driveways and windy streets to get to it. So they would park the wardrobe trailer and the dressing rooms down on a main street. So the script supervisor, who was Sandy King, and Susie and the hairdresser was Diane Pepper, decided they wanted to play a trick on Cybill. And it was near the end of shooting of the pilot. So, and they wanted me to be in on it. I think we had 5 or 6 of those dresses. Susie got those 2 girls in, got them into those black dresses, and then she wanted to put me in one. But I got scared and I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. And they all wore them to the set, and they did it just like reality, to wait and see when Cybill would catch on, you know. And Cybill finally looked around and she noticed, and it gave her a big chuckle. But that was one of the cute things from when we did the pilot. I'll talk a little bit about season number 1. We did the pilot. We finished, I want to say, sometime in November of '84. And just before Christmas of that year, we were told that we were going to do 5 one-hour episodes. We came back after the holidays and we started prepping season number 1. Season number 1 was a real eye-opening experience for me because I had worked on series television before. And the thing about series television is there's a formula that was accepted across the board, all the networks, all the studios, all the production companies. And it was generally for a 1-hour show, a 7 to 8 day work week. And you really didn't vary from that. You would cram whatever filming you had into those 7 or 8 days of work. Well, we got into season 1, and before we knew it, we were shooting weekends, and it just became crazy. I remember when we got to episode 6, which was the food fight episode in the hotel, we had a production meeting on Sunday morning, which was unheard of in the television industry at those times. You have to remember, television was much more constrained and controlled. Most of the studios and networks would say, if it's too expensive, take it out, find a way to cut it, find a way to shorten it. That didn't happen on Moonlighting. Consequently, there we were and I thought it was funny. I remember being very young and thinking, should I wear my pajamas on Sunday morning to the fitting? I mean, to the meeting. That's really what it was like. Couple of the things in that food fight, I want to say, is probably one of the more memorable episodes of those episodes that we did. It was, I believe, a Sunday morning that we got word that they wanted Cybill to be in the French maid's outfit, and they wanted Bruce to be in a waiter outfit. We didn't have waiter outfits, and we didn't have French maid outfits. So Robert and the workroom started building that French maid outfit for Cybill. We had to have multiples on that outfit. I had to go out and shop white shirts and black pants, and I don't remember where I got the black jackets or whatever he wore, but I had to go out and get all that stuff. And it was a Sunday. We worked from Sunday morning at 9 o'clock through the night into Monday morning. We loaded out all the costumes in our cars and drove downtown to I think it's the Biltmore Hotel in downtown LA. Offloaded everything, got everything set up. We started shooting that day, and we shot everything with Bruce and Cybill all the way until the food fight began. Well, once we got there, we asked, well, what is the food? Someone had decided that fettuccine Alfredo was a good idea. Mm-hmm. So I, being young and fairly inexperienced, didn't really understand the ramifications of doing food fights with food like that. But I found out real quick. When we got to the end of the day on Monday, and mind you, I'd still not been home to shower. I had still not been home. I had gone to work on Sunday morning. It was now late on Monday, and I was still at work. We were still at work. We sent our set people home. They continued. Once the food started to fly, they sent Bruce and Cybill home, and they brought in the stunt doubles, and we did the really gory work happen from the time Bruce and Cybill left until the following morning when we finally wrapped. When we wrapped that scene, it was difficult to walk in the banquet room. The floor was so coated with fettuccine Alfredo sauce. We were slipping and sliding. All those beaded dresses and sequin dresses and tuxedos were completely covered in Alfredo sauce. I remember it took us probably 2.5 hours to pick up all the filthy clothes and put them in bags. We called the overnight dry cleaning company and warned them. We sent the stuff off. Once we got it sent off, Susie and Robert and I went back to the office to check in. Bruce and Cybill were shooting on stage at Fox at that point because they had slept all night long. We went back, made sure everything was going on. It was now the last day of shooting on the show. Checked in. The dry cleaning came back, and I remember the bill was something like $15,000. And back in 1985, $15,000 for cleaning stuff was a lot of money. That was more than a budget for the costumes on an episode of a show. And I remember John Perry, the man I was telling you was head of the department, was livid, and he was like yelling, "You have to do something about this bill." And the cleaners looked at us and said, we had to clean out the cleaning solution of the dry cleaning machine 3 times. It got so gummed up with the fettuccine sauce and everything. So that was kind of the beginning of that. We came back not long after the end of doing those 5 additional episodes, and we were told that we had been picked up for 11. We came back and we started doing those 11 episodes. And what kind of comes to mind in that season is I was looking at some of the shows, and there's the one where the woman comes in the black dress and she has the black hat with the black veil over her face. And as we were getting the story given to us, we realized that Bruce was going to have to wear a dress, that male actor was going to have to wear a dress, Cybill was going to have one like it. So we kind of went into overdrive on how are we going to get these dresses? We're going to have to make them. And Robert, being the great designer that he was, we found this fabric, this black fabric. We bought a ton of it, and we had these great ladies in the workroom sew these dresses up. I don't remember specifically about the hats. I think Susie kind of got into that because it was a woman's costume thing. What I do remember is that Robert was a real stickler when it came to a man wearing a woman's dress. He wanted to make sure that if we were going to be fooled in the story, that it had to be believable that who was wearing that dress was really a woman until there was a reveal. So consequently, we knew Bruce didn't have the time, and we didn't think he would want to come over and do a body pad fitting, which entailed putting on a long line girdle and then putting padding all over the long line girdle. And then we would cover the long line girdle with a pair of pantyhose and attach it to flush out the buttocks and the hips. And then we would put a bra on, and we would have the padding in the bra. And then Robert, being a stickler, made sure that we had hooks at the bottom of the bra cups that could hook to the top of the girdle so that the bra wouldn't ride up. So there's this whole undergarment engineering thing that we had to go through. And I look back on that, and I think Ki Johnson, who was Bruce's stunt double, he came in and we did the fitting on him, and he was such a gent. He was such a pro. We had him standing in that fitting room for over an hour and a half while we fiddled with padding and tacking it on and putting on the pantyhose, seeing if it was right, pulling them off, putting more padding. And that was how we did that. We had all the dresses made up, all the hats made up. I know that somebody had asked a question, how did we feel about the dresses being destroyed? It's actually really funny. Those dresses didn't get destroyed. They were made out of indestructible polyester. So literally at the end of the day, they could go in the washing machine and the dryer and come out. We could use them again. That was part of Robert's engineering and ingenuity that was so priceless
Mhm.
that I remember. Um, the uh, the other episode that stands out in my mind is the one in the South American casino when Cybill goes down to confront the accountant who had taken her money. And at that particular time in 1985, the Nordstrom department store chain had opened a store in Westwood in the West Side Pavilion.
Mhm.
They being new to the business of being a department store in Southern California, had taken on the task that the other department stores had, and they had opened what they call a studio services department,
Mhm.
which is usually one or two people that are dedicated to working with the costume people and the costume designers from the movie and television industry. And I remember we ended up there. Susie and Robert and I had gone shopping one night for the show, and we ended up there, and there was a mannequin with that dress. Robert called it the balloon dress. And it was on a mannequin, and Robert saw it, and he said, I really want that dress. So the dress, I want to say, was $10,000. It was like $10,000. It was a Bob Mackie dress from his ready-to-wear line. We're going to have another cup of coffee, please. I'm sorry, Diana. This is the remnants
Oh,
of.
no worries.
So at that particular time, what was really cute was there was this woman who ran the department, and her name was Lavon. And she was elegant, to say the least. She was a character, and she was very elegant. She was always done up. She looked like she was ready for her camera test every time we went in that store. And she was sweet. And she had a partner named Yvonne, and I started nicknaming them the Vonettes, like the Ronettes and things like that.
Mhm.
I called them the Vonettes. But that particular night, I want to say it was like 9:30, the store was closing. Robert wanted that dress. And we were like, Susie and I said, Robert, $8,000 is marked down. And I remember Lavon went to the store manager and backed and forth, and she got them to agree to sell us that dress for $4,000 that night. And that was how we got that dress. And I remember thinking, $4,000 is a lot of money. But, I don't know if there was any fallout from it. I don't remember any. I know that when we got it back to the department and Robert got ready to use it, he took it into the workroom, and he had the ladies in the workroom. Those balloons are much brighter than what they photographed. What Robert did was he had chiffon cut and applied to those balloons to cut the brightness. It just muted it down a little bit so that they weren't quite so bright. And that was how that got born. There was another funny story. The night before we shot the casino sequence, we had that cream dinner jacket for Bruce, which really wasn't a dinner jacket. It was a suit coat that we found. And we had the tailor put the satin applique on the lapel, as you would have with a tuxedo or a dinner jacket. And you can't get white wool. You can get cream wool, but you can't get white. And Robert wanted the dress shirt that went under that dinner jacket to be cream. He wanted it to be dyed just a little bit. And I remember it was around 1:30 in the morning, and I was trying to dye those shirts. And the guy from the dry cleaners came, and I was going to have him send them out and have him press them and then deliver them to us in the morning. I remember he came, and I got them out of the washing machine. I said, they're still wet, but they just need to be pressed and dried. And I went to the set the next morning, and they had laundered them and washed all the color right out of them. There we were. And it was too late to do anything, but that's my recollection of staying there so late and trying to accomplish the thing that Robert wanted, only to get to the set in the morning and have it be completely gone. But that was a really beautiful set, and it was really, and thank you, by the way, it was the Bellage, that hotel that you mentioned, Diana. I had forgotten the name of it, but it's still there, which is surprising. I want to talk a little bit about the black and white episode. We were working, I guess it was on show number 3. And one day I was in the costume department and the phone rang, and it was Jay Daniel. And Jay Daniel said, I need to give you a heads up. And it was a Thursday. I'll never forget. He said, we're going to shoot through tomorrow, and then we're going to shut the show down for a week. He said, Bruce and Cybill are really tired, and they need a vacation. So ABC is going to send them to Hawaii on a vacation. They're going to pack them up and send them to Hawaii to get some well-needed rest. In the meantime, I want to give you the heads up that we're going to be doing a black and white episode, and it's 1940s, and it's a nightclub, and there's an orchestra, and blah, blah, blah. There's singing, and there's this, and there's that. I said, you do realize it's Thursday afternoon, and you do realize, now this is Thursday, we were going to have the following week off, and then we were going to come back the week after that on a Monday, and we were going to shoot that huge nightclub sequence. We were starting in the nightclub with the orchestra, with the audience, with all the wait staff and everybody. And Jay said, yes. So Robert and Susie were out, and when they came back, I told them what was going on. They said, let's go talk to Jay. So we drove over to Fox and got in Jay's office and sat down across from him, the three of us. And I remember I was sitting on the far left, and we were explaining to Jay what our dilemma was, that, you know, could he bring them back from Hawaii on Saturday so we could see them and do the fittings with them? Because Robert wanted to build a dress for her to be the nightclub singer. And Jay said no. And we kept giving him all the reasons that we were begging him, please get them back early so we can have a shot at fitting them in period clothes. And Jay looked at us at one point and he said, you know, so far on this movie, the only people that are being inconvenienced is your department. And if you're the only department that's inconvenienced, you're just going to have to be inconvenienced. And that was an eye-opening experience, that moment in time for me in filmmaking. I will say this, that years later, in hindsight, looking back over my filmmaking career and knowing the position that Jay was in and having looked at some of the videos with Glenn and Jay and Bob and even Bruce and Cybill, I totally understand why he said that. We did indeed manage to pull the clothes together in that time frame. We did indeed manage to get everything to fit them. I don't remember the details, but we managed to pull it off. One of the interesting things that we were doing, since we knew that it was going to be in black and white, and this is before the days of computers and digital cameras and things like that, we bought a black and white Polaroid and a bunch of black and white Polaroid film. And we had earmarked everything we wanted Bruce to wear in that episode. And there were ties and shirts and jacket combinations. And Robert had me put a series of outfits together on a mannequin and photograph them in black and white so that we could see, because the way things look when you see, if you look at red in color and you look at it in black and white, it's completely different. It's very different. And that was how we came to the conclusion of what Bruce's costumes were going to be consisting of. The tie, to make sure that we had the right amount of contrast and blending of tones and everything for that particular episode. Another interesting part of the story is the first day that we were back, that Monday when we were starting shooting, Cybill was notorious for wanting to wear her sneakers into the set. And I'll get to the sneaker thing about her and sneakers and the shoes in a minute. Mm-hmm. And that particular day, everybody was a little on pins and needles because Robert had built that black strapless dress for her. He had come, he made it for her. And he was really excited to see that costume on her and in the context of the set. So Susie, the women's costumer, took the outfit into Cybill's room and was going to help her get dressed. Cybill said something to the tune of, I think I'll just wear my sneakers into the set. I'll put the heels on once I get inside. And Susie, who was amazing, I miss her being in the industry, she looked at Cybill and she said, you know, Cybill, we've worked really hard to put this costume together for you and this look for you. And the least you could do is put the entire costume on and wear it to the set so that everybody can see the entire look in context. That's the least you can do for us. And Cybill acquiesced, and she did. Much to her surprise, when she got to the set, all the grips and electricians and the crew started whistling at her because she looked so phenomenal. And that was something she could relate to. You know what I mean? So I always look back on that memory, and when I see clips from that episode, by the way, they were magnificent in that episode. They really were.
Mhm.
I remember that very fondly. While we're on the subject of Cybill's shoes and the sneakers and the high heels and things, in the comments on Facebook, I see a lot of people saying, well, no wonder she didn't want to wear heels. They're so uncomfortable. There's a couple of things I want to make a point of. The first is, in the movie industry, anybody who's glamorous, Sophia Loren, Diana Ross, Faye Dunaway, Jane Fonda, any of those ladies, glamorous ladies, it's not always comfortable. It's not comfortable to wear a girdle. It's not comfortable to wear a waist cincher. It's not comfortable to wear an underwire bra. It's not comfortable to wear really high heel shoes. But it's part of the package. And it's part of what I think the public and the producers and the studios want to see. It's part of what they pay for. That being said, alternately, I personally, as a guy, hate wearing a tie. I hate wearing a suit. I hate wearing any of that stuff. But when push comes to shove and it's needed for me to do it, I will do it. And I know many men feel the same way. So I just wanted to throw that in there. I think another thing, because somebody made a mention on Facebook about her sneakers and things like that. When Robert would do her clothes and come up with the concept of blouses and jackets and skirts and pick the fabric and have the things made up in the workroom with the ladies, he took a lot of time and care to do that. And the shoes and the belts and the jewelry were all part of the package. It's really important, as I mentioned before, that the costume be seen not only, and it's important on most of the shows that I've done with costume designers, that an actor or an actress, when they're bringing in a new costume, wearing a new costume for the first time, wear the complete costume to the set, so that the director and the producers, whoever are there, can see the entire idea. They get very, and I've seen this happen, if pieces of this costume aren't there, they don't always visualize it and understand it, which puts a burden on the costume department to then try to convince them that it all really works. So for Cybill to not wear her shoes and to be caught in scenes with those sneakers, to me, it was very disheartening, because everybody in our department really was working hard and really putting their all into it. I also think it was not right of the camera department and the continuity, whether it be script or the ADs or whoever it was, to not notice that and point it out of somebody. But that's from a costume point of view. But I felt it was really important for the fans and the people who really follow the show to understand that perspective from us. How difficult and disheartening it was for us to have her do that. So that being said, I've covered that bit. I want to talk a little bit about episode number 8, where they have the auto body shop and they go in and they have the paint fight. One of the things that would happen on Moonlighting, one of the things that would happen on Moonlighting, we would get the scripts in pieces. So we might get pages 1 through 10 and pages 30 through 35, and then page 45 through 55. And that was all we would have. That's the written word that we would have. So Robert, the designer, would often call Glenn Karen and say, Glenn, you need to tell me a story. You need to connect the dots here. We need to know what we're doing. That particular episode, we didn't foresee the paint fight in the auto body shop. And when we got the pages, we had not supplied enough multiples for the stunt doubles and for Bruce and Cybill, because you've always got to have more than one. If Bruce gets paint and it's a bad take, you got to take off those clothes, put on clean clothes, and do the take all over again. Same with the stunt guy. So if something like that, it wasn't unusual for us to have 5 or 6 of the same garments for them, for that particular costume change. And I remember Susie and I scrambling to get those clothes, because we had bought them probably a week or 2 before, possibly even months before. And now we were scrambling to cover the script needs because we didn't have it. One of the other things that would happen on Moonlighting that was also interesting, and it really happened in season 1 and in season 2 and in season 3. By the time we got to a certain point, we would be so far behind schedule. So the 8 days that we were allotted to shoot an episode, we would never be finished. So what we would do is they would, in the first ADs and Jay Daniel, and I think even Glenn, they would sit down and they would figure out what remained to be done. And there would be what we called the Bruce and Cybill unit. And then there was, which was an entire shooting company just doing the scenes with Bruce and Cybill that needed to be done, either for the previous episode or for the current one. And then we had the guest star unit. So for chase scenes or things like where people are walking down a hall or doing something bad or whatever the case may be, that was that. And then we would always have what we called a second unit, which was the stunt unit, which was the fight sequences, car chase sequences, running sequences, things like that. Mm-hmm. That would go on from like episode 5 or 6 all the way through to the end of the season. We were always behind. I would say we went as far as, I would say some of the episodes were probably 22 to 25 days long, if you added all the different units in terms of putting them together. But I got to tell you, it was fun. The show was fun. During that, I'm going to tell kind of a funny story about the way certain people, the way studios and networks perceived television. ABC Circle on Moonlighting, ABC had what they called production executives. And that particular season, we were on our second production executive. And we knew her. She had worked for ABC. We had worked for ABC. We'd see them around all the time in the building. And there was a pair of underwear that Cybill liked, and Susie bought them. Once Cybill made Susie aware that she particularly liked these underwear, Susie called the manufacturer, found out that they had discontinued making them, found out what they had on backstock, and bought all that they had remaining, which came to somewhere over $1,000. So when the bill got through and this production executive saw the bill, she got really angry with us. And she went to her boss, who was the second in command at ABC Circle Films, a wonderful man by the name of Ted Butcher. And there was a meeting called with Robert, Susie, myself, the production exec, and Ted Butcher. And again, we were sitting there facing him. And the incident had been laid out to Ted. And Susie, in her brilliance, said to Ted, "You know, Ted, I know it's just underwear, but what's going to happen if one day Cybill says, 'Where are my underwear? The ones I told you I liked, the ones that I want?'" And Susie said, "And I don't have them." And she gets upset. And the time it takes to rectify the issue, is it really worth keeping all the grips, electric, camera, hair, makeup, sound people, and everybody on that set waiting while we rectify this over a $1,000, $1,300 purchase of underwear? And in that moment, Ted looked at us all and he said, "You know what? You're absolutely right." And the meeting was over, and that was the end of it. But I found that really, again, another eye-opening experience, of them really hitting. He was great. He saw the big picture. But that's how the networks, that was their perspective, was, why did you spend all this money on underwear? And but just to give you kind of and there we were spending crazy money on all these other episodes. Mm-hmm. When we got to the episode of Every Father's Daughter is a Virgin, we found out that Eva Marie Saint was going to be portraying her mom. And I think it really made everybody's heart go crazy, because she was such a star. She was famous, and such a major actress. I can't remember the guy's name who played the father. I'm sorry. I'm sure, Diana, you know what?
Robert Webber.
Robert Webber.
Yeah.
And they cast Robert Webber as the dad, and we were doing the show. And I have to tell you, that's the one episode, I think I actually did catch it while it aired. And Cybill completely won me over in that episode. I didn't really ever watch them that much, because Tuesday nights I was either at work or I was home in bed by the time the show aired. But I happened to catch that one. And the scenes that really got me were when she beats him up in the parking lot, the ferocity of that she was able to conjure. And I felt the way he then reciprocated because he was really, I don't know, it worked. That whole thing worked.
Mhm.
And the scene where she confronts him in the hotel room and she's crying, and the tenderness between the two of them, to me, was just, I mean, it's still to this day one of my favorite parts of the show. Whenever I see that, I'll actually even find it and fast forward to it, because I just thought the performances were magical and really great. And it really gave me a new appreciation of Cybill Shepherd, that particular episode. I'm going to go to the one where we had Whoopi Goldberg. It was the
Mhm.
last episode of the season. Whoopi and Bruce had become friends because by this time, Bruce was a sensation. By the end of, this is now spring of 1986, I want to
Mhm.
say.
Yeah.
He had become quite a sensation. She was a sensation. And when they told us that she had agreed to come and do the show, Robert had done a sketch of her in a costume. Now, because I wasn't the woman's costumer, I can't remember all the context, but what I will tell you is this. In the sketch, she had a blouse on, and it had what we call a keyhole, which goes from below the neck and kind of comes down to the bust and shows cleavage. And he had that drawn in the sketch. And Whoopi came in because we had all decided that the best way to deal with her, because none of us knew her, and she was a pretty big star, so she needed, and she was friends with Bruce, so everybody, we kind of wanted to handle her with kid gloves. Little did we know she was fabulous. She was really amazing and sweet. She came in and she sat down, and Robert and Susie were talking to her, and Robert pulled out the sketch, and I remember she pointed to the keyhole in the blouse, to the cleavage, and she said, "What's that?" And I just remember laughing because he said, "Well, that's cleavage, and you're going to need a bra, and it's going to need to have padding, and blah, blah, blah." And I don't think she liked that idea. I don't know that the costume ever came to fruition. I can't remember, but I do remember her, and I remember her being really, really a lovely human being, and fun. That episode turned into craziness because we were all of a sudden breaking the fourth wall and going out into the studio, and we were supposed to have all those people in various costumes and things like that. And they decided that they wanted to hire a lot of little people because they wanted Keystone cops running through the studio. And I remember I ended up having to have Western costume make pieces for the little people because we couldn't find enough Keystone Cop costumes in their stock to cover the amount of little people that they were casting to be in that particular segment. But I remember we waited and waited for the Judd Nelson character to get cast. And when they finally did cast him and we got his sizes, I was a little beside myself. And I think it was because we were at the end of the season and we were exhausted and we had a few changes for him and we're going to need multiples and things like that. And I remember Robert said, "That's okay, Bobby. We're going to go through Bruce's old clothes and we're going to use those." And that was what we did. We went into our stock, we went into the Bruce section, and we found things. And I think if I remember correctly, by that point, when we were in season 2, Bruce had actually changed sizes from season 1 to season 2. When we fit him for the pilot in season 1, he was like a 40 regular man's jacket and wore like a 16 and a half maybe shirt. And when we got in to season 2, he had jumped up to like a size 17 shirt and he was wearing a 42 jacket. So we had all the clothes from season 1 for Bruce in the department. And if I remember correctly, that was the stock we went to and where we culled all the clothes for him for that particular episode and finished that off. I'm going to jump into, a couple of things I do want to mention about the end of that episode. When you're looking at it and Bruce and Cybill are in the Blue Moon and they're tearing apart the set, you see the prop people coming and taking things away from the set. There's, I think, a picture on the wall that's being taken down by a guy in, I believe, a plaid shirt, and that was Skip Bodine, our first assistant director. And the man who comes in and takes Bruce's sport coat off or suit coat off was Charlie McCurry, his costumer. that season, or the men's set costumer that season. And the woman taking things off Cybill was actually Pam, and I can't remember her last name, who was the woman who took care of Cybill on the set and the other ladies. So there were a lot of real people used in that sequence. And when I rewatched it recently and they walk out to the parking lot and Bruce gets into the black Corvette, that was one of the things that Bruce bought for himself. One of the first treats to himself that he bought was the Corvette. It was something he had always wanted, and he could finally afford it. And that was his real car. So just wanted to throw that in. When we got into, I want to talk, I'm looking at my, pardon me if I look away, I'm sorry. I want to talk a little bit about the scope of the popularity of the show. It was enormous, and it's hard for me to explain to people who weren't around then, but it was very much like the Game of Thrones. You know, I mean, people talk now about the Game of Thrones, they talk about Handmaid's Tale, they talk about some of these things that just reached The Last of Us. At that particular time, the shows that were that popular were Miami Vice, Dynasty, LA Law, and Moonlighting. We were the premier shows on television at that time. And Bruce was nailing it. He just was nailing it. And people loved him, and they loved the chemistry. The show just became gigantic. It really became gigantic. I want to talk a little bit about Glenn Caron too. When we finished season 2, I think it was season 2, and at Christmas in season 2, he would send bonus checks over to us, Susie and I. And that had never happened, and it has not happened since in my career. And they weren't little bonus checks. They were really nice bonus checks that he would send over. And when we finished the season, he would do the same thing. It was very generous. In fact, those guys, working with those guys was really a joy. Jay was really the nuts and bolts guy. Glenn was the creative guy. Bob Butler was really only there for the pilot. He didn't come back. And just in case anybody doesn't know, in the world of television, the director is important, but the people like Glenn, the creator or the showrunner, whatever you want to call them, that's really where the buck stops. That's who you go to for your decisions. And I know there have been questions about where did certain things in the show come from, what instigated them to be there. And I can't remember exactly for everything, but I will tell you this. I can't believe that anything got put out of the ordinary that Robert would normally do. For instance, the boxing shorts with the hearts, that had to be a Glenn thing that was decided upon between he and Robert. They had a really great working relationship. They had a great respect for each other. I'm going to move along to season 3. I'm going to talk about the episode, the boxing episode, the one where Don King is in it. A couple of funny stories about that. We were trying to get boxing equipment for Bruce and the other boxers in the show. And we located a source in downtown LA that had boots and things like that. And we ended up needing more of something. I think it was more boots. And so I called the store, and I was going to go down and get the boots. And Susie looked at me and said, "Bobby, that's what we have Teamsters for. You send a driver down to pick up the stuff. You just send the driver." Well, I was never quite that happy with that. I was the kind of guy, I wanted to go get it and make sure that it was right, and that way I could see it with my own eyes and know that it was right. Well, this one particular, because the boots then had to go from the boot place, the boxing place, to the shoe shop to be painted, because Robert had designed a whole color scheme, and the boots all had to be painted. So we send these boots, the ones that were for the Bruce's character, and the guy that he was replacing in the ring. And we sent them, and when they came back, the morning comes, we're doing the sequence, and Charles, my set man, comes to me and he says, "Bobby, these boots are a size 7. And Bruce was like a 9.5 or a 10, and they were never going to work. And I remember they were rehearsing, and Charles and I were frantic, and we were out in the parking lot, and we were spray painting the shoes, because that was a thing a trick Robert had taught us, like to cover up the color. If the shoes were red, white, and blue, you had to spray them silver, let it dry, and then you had to go over with the right color. And Charles had one shoe and I had another shoe. And we're spraying and we're painting and we're going at it and we're trying to make it in time to get before the camera could roll. And when we got done, we realized we both had the same shoe. He had a right shoe and I had a right shoe, or we both had a left shoe.
Wow.
But we didn't have a right and a left. And we had spent all this time doing it. And I was about the point, I thought I was literally going to start crying because I thought we can't fix this in time. And I think it was Glenn Caron or somebody on the set said, don't worry about it. Tie the shoes together by their laces and we're just going to hang them over the door of the locker and let them be a prop. And that was how we solved that problem on that show. The other was we were shooting at the Olympic Auditorium in downtown LA. And they had told me that Don King was going to be coming. And I said, well, what about a tuxedo? How am I going to fit him? And they said, oh, he has tuxedos, Bob. Don't worry. We'll have him bring his own tuxedo. I said, okay, great. So I didn't give it a second thought. So the next morning I get down to the Olympic Auditorium and it's raining, which if any of you who live in LA know, rain in Los Angeles is like a major sleet storm in a major city on the East Coast. It just throws everybody off and everything off. Mm-hmm. So I get down there and I'm on the trailer and all of a sudden one of the ADs comes to the wardrobe trailer and says, we have a little problem. I said, what's that? He said, Don King's luggage got lost by the airline. I said, so what are you trying to tell me? He said, so there's no tuxedo. So I said, okay. I said, you realize it's 7 o'clock in the morning and we're in downtown LA and it's raining and where do you expect this? And I didn't say all that, but that was what went through my head. Mm-hmm. So I had to go over to Don King's dressing room. And I don't know if you ladies remember what his hair looked like or if any of the fans remember, but his hair was literally straight up like that on his head. It was like his signature hairstyle. And I remember I went into his trailer and I'm talking to him. And as I'm talking to him to get his sizes and understand what happened, I realized he was combing his hair. And I remember thinking, you know, Bob, do you know how many people in the world would love to see this and wonder how he combs his hair? And you're actually getting to witness it up close and personal. That was like such a funny moment for me to walk away. But we did. I managed to get him a tuxedo and we got it on him and he shot and all went fine. But that's one of the things that I remember distinctly from that particular episode. Talk about the Taming of the Shrew episode. You guys call it Atomic Space Shakespeare. We always refer to it as the Taming of the Shrew. When we got to that part of the show, excuse me, I'm going to have a sip of coffee. When we got to the decision that the Taming of the Shrew was going to be done, I had decided that I was not going to stay on Moonlighting. I had just fallen in love. I had just turned 30. I had made a decision that I wanted my friends, all my contemporaries were doing feature films. I felt that was where I wanted to be. I didn't want to get pigeonholed on a television series, even though it had accomplished for me many things that I wanted it to, which was buying my first home. But I had decided that I wanted to spend more time with my new partner, whom, by the way, I'm still with, and we'll have 39 years together this month. So I went in one morning and I said to Robert Turteries, I said, you know, I think I'm going to have to leave the show. I just feel really compelled to do it. I've got to get on with my life. And Robert was okay. He wasn't happy. We had a really good working relationship and the show was running along fine. Susie was angry with me because she wanted to leave because she wanted to have babies. So that morning, Glenn Caron called and told Robert, and we had heard rumor there was going to be this Shakespearean episode. And Robert was excited because he was like, I'm going to do it all Italianette and I'm going to this and I'm going to that. It was like a big, huge design thing for him, which made him really happy. And that morning he came to me and he said, we're going to, you know, the next episode we're going to do is going to be the Taming of the Shrew. And I went to Susie and I said, you know, I'll make you a deal. I'll stay and I'll do the Taming of the Shrew and the episode after that. That way, Robert isn't having to break in a new crew on a huge episode like that. And if the show gets nominated for an Emmy, we'll be involved in that nomination. Won't that be good? And we'll get to help out Robert and the company at the same time. If on the other end of this, Robert lets us both go at the same time so that we can both leave, because she was angry that she felt she had to stay since I was leaving. So we hit him up with that deal and he accepted it. So hence I ended up staying to do Taming of the Shrew. That was an amazing experience. Robert, literally, we went to Western Costume Company, which is at that time the world's largest costume resource ever. And they were located in Hollywood on Melrose Avenue, what is now part of Paramount Pictures. And they gave us a room in the back, and Robert sat there with an illustrator, a woman by the name of Lois D'Armond, who is on Facebook. She's brilliant. And this is before the days of computers, when computer generated art, as is so much these days for the Marvel movies and Star Wars movies and things like that, all of those illustrations are generated by computer. The illustrators do it on computer. Lois did it with a pencil and watercolors and colored pencils. And there was Lois on one side of Robert and a girl named Valerie Laban on the other side of Robert. And in the corner of the room, there was Mannequin. And we had pulled all of these various costumes that Western Costume had that were in such a state of disarray. They were so old. They were so beaten up. And what Robert would do is Robert would put them on the mannequin, and Valerie had fabrics. And he would say, here's what we're going to do with that costume. We're going to take off the sleeves. We're going to make a new sleeve. We're going to cover the bodice of it with this fabric. We're going to trim it with this trim. We're going to put this lace on it. And we're going to match it to that pant. And we're going to trim the pant in this. And he worked out the whole thing for all those bit players, all those extras and everything. It all got worked out on a mannequin in that room with Robert. I mean, he must have sat there for hours every day with the sketch artist and Valerie, just because as those things would get done, we would get the stuff into the workroom at Western Costume. They were doing all the men's things. I remember I don't remember where Cybill's clothes were made. I can't remember if Bob Mackey's shop made them or not. I want to say that they did, because Robert Turteries had a real close in with Bob Mackey and all of his people. So we were having clothes made for her in one place. Elise Beasley's were made in another place. Bruce's were being made at Western Costume Company. I think Curtis Armstrong's were made at Western as well. I remember getting a call from Richard Lehrman, who was the production manager, berating me because he said, we have to be ready to shoot on such and thus a day. And I said, we'll never be ready. We can't do it. There's too much work on our end. And he said, well, the sets, I said, why don't you start with something else? He said, well, the sets won't be ready. I said, well, then let the set people who were doing the sets sweat for a minute. We're having a hard time. Won't be ready. Cybill caught the flu, and that changed everything. And she was out for a week. And that was the week that saved our lives. That was the single thing that got us that hump of time. And when I say hump of time, we were literally, this is no joke, the workroom would come in the morning at 7 and work until 10 o'clock at night. Those guys sitting, and it was a huge workroom of all these tailors just sitting and sewing and cutting and doing. And I was there 7 in the morning till 10 at night. It was insane trying to get that episode done. But when it got done, it really did look amazing. And we were really proud. And we knew, after having lost the Emmy for the black and white episode, we knew that this one, if it lost, we were going to be mad. We were going to not be happy. I was looking at Will McKenzie's interview on YouTube, and he talked about how Cybill got so upset that day that the dress was itching her, which reminded me, I do remember something about that, not a lot, but those outfits were heavy. She was right. They were heavy. There was nothing light about them at all. It was a lot for the two of them to carry around and tote around. Give me just 1 second to look at my notes here. I remember, this was funny, we were having a production meeting about that particular episode in the production offices at Fox, and we were sitting at the table with Jay Daniel. We looked at Robert Turteries, and Robert always smoked, so he would everybody smoked back then. Robert smoked a lot, and Robert was sitting there smoking a cigarette. And Jay looked at him and said, so Robert, how much money has to be in that Brinks truck that I'm going to have to pull up to the costume department? And Robert just took a big drag of his cigarette and said, trucks, Brinks trucks. And I started laughing because I knew he was right. I knew that it was going to cost a fortune. And it did. For back then, it was, I think we spent probably close to $100,000 for the costumes. And that back then, budgets were like 10,000 for an expensive show. You might have $10,000, 15,000 at the most. And we were pushing 100,000 for that particular episode. The last episode that I did was It's a Wonderful Job. I want to talk about the two things. I want to talk about the color of the costume changing for Maddie and her guardian angel. I don't remember the logic in that, but I think Robert and Glenn wanted to portray the difference between the real world and her afterlife kind of world, I think was the idea on that. I'm going to try to explain something, and I hope it doesn't come across wrong. Glenn said in one of his interviews that Cybill was very unhappy while doing the show, and I don't think that he was wrong. I don't think she was horribly miserable, but I think that it was difficult for her, having been started in the industry so young and having gained so much fame and fortune with those movies that she started out with that were such major hits with major directors, and she became such a thing. And then she left the industry after a series of flops, and she moved back to Tennessee. When she came back and she got on Moonlighting, the show became a hit. But this was a show where Bruce was the new thing and the new talent and the new discovery. And he was getting a lot of recognition. And I can't help but believe that that wasn't difficult for her. Do you know what I mean? I think it's sort of like when your little sister gets the gift that you really wanted, or a sibling gets something that you really wanted. And I think that was hard. Both of those people, she had such major success. And I think that, and many of us kind of wondered why she was unhappy. Back then, we couldn't really see, the crew couldn't really see the forest for the trees because we were so close to the show. And I often wonder if Cheryl didn't get the part just to have another blonde bombshell on the show and have Bruce giving her attention. Do you know what I mean? Because it could very well have been some other actress who was a brunette or a redhead or something. But the fact that it was Cheryl Teagues and she had been a model and she was so beautiful, I often wonder if that wasn't like a little intentional is the word I would use. That certainly crossed a lot of our minds. And in all fairness to everybody involved, what I want to say is, when I say the forest for the trees, I think that it was that way for all of us. I know that for me in particular, because we got the scripts in such a broken up manner, and because we were shooting so many units at once. This was before cell phones, before computers, before internet, all that stuff. We were having to do everything physically. We were working very hard physically to get things done. And we were trying to make the show look good and keep up a standard. And it was very hard for us to look at the show with the eyes that I see you looking at the show with. When I look at the Facebook page and I see the postings and everything, it really is opening my eyes to something that I never saw before. But I want to say for Bruce, I want to say for Glenn, for all of us, we were all so up against it because we were trying to make a really great show, but we were so close to it, we couldn't there was no way we could distance ourselves to have really the right kind of perspective. I hope that makes some sort of sense. And on that note, I think I'm going to let you ladies go for the questions.
Okay. All right. Thank you. This is wonderful. And we're very happy to be able to talk to you because, as I said before, this is an aspect of the show that doesn't get covered much when it comes to costuming and what goes into it. No.
I will tell you this, almost everything you see from the middle of season 2 was almost all made for Cybill Shepherd. almost all of it.
Yeah.
Robert kept those ladies going like crazy. Bruce's stuff wasn't really, we bought all that. We had ins with different places we would get things from. So there wasn't a need to make things for him.
Okay. Okay, Joy, do you want to start with the questions?
Sure. Robert, that was amazing. I really enjoyed listening, hearing all those memories. Thank you. Let's see. Did Bruce and Cybill or anyone in the cast have any say on what their characters were? I know you talked about Bruce. What about Cybill, Elise, Curtis?
Honestly, I think the truth of the matter is no. Nobody ever came to us and said, Bruce wants such and this. I mentioned to Diana in a conversation that, what is that, the limbo thing, where they're under the limbo thing?
My friend David.
Bruce, that show, Bruce wanted to wear a Hawaiian shirt. Robert was dead set against it. I went to Glenn Caron with that request, and Glenn said, he's not going to wear a Hawaiian shirt, but get some. I think I went out and spent $1,000 on Hawaiian shirts that day, and Bruce did not wear one. There was an edict from the network about how they wanted Bruce to look, and we had to follow that. They were sort of like the all-powerful. And I think Glenn had a lot of trust in Robert and his abilities, and Glenn had a really good sensibility. When it came to Cybill, I think, really liked Robert, and I think she understood that he made her look beautiful. And any woman like Cybill, who's an actress, who has been a star, knows the power of having somebody who has your back that is going to make you look. I mean, when I look at the show now and I see certain episodes of Cybill in costumes, I'm taken aback at how gorgeous they are and how beautiful they make her look. And again, there wasn't really time, because it wasn't like somebody said, here's a 60-page script, break it down. We would get the scripts in bits and pieces. And then Robert would have to ask for the things to be laid in between, so that we knew what we had to get. We would get like an overview. And Bruce and Cybill had, in all fairness to them too, they had their hands full. They literally did get those pages. They would come in the morning and get those pages. And when you see them face to face, bickering back and forth, boom, 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 that's not ad-libbed. That was written. And Glenn was a stickler for sticking to the script. He was a stickler for that. So there wasn't. We didn't have that luxury. If that makes any sense, we really didn't have that luxury. That's something kind of reserved for movies in a way.
Okay.
Have they ever appeared with something of their own in an episode or taken home something they liked?
I don't remember them ever wearing anything of their own when I was on the show, and I don't remember them ever taking anything from the show ever. I don't think that the things Cybill wore were the things she would want to necessarily wear in her real life. And I know Bruce didn't care for his clothes, so no.
We would love to hear about dressing them both in the episode Symphony and Knocked Flat. Cybill wore a beautiful white and gold gown. I know you talked about the boxing part of it.
Yes. I took a look at that episode because of I saw that question on Facebook. I think that was something that Robert purchased. I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't make the skirt because it's different, but I think that bodice was purchased and he made the skirt for it. That would be my guess from having seen what I saw. That wasn't unlike him. To find something, there's a few dresses as I look back at some of the publicity photos and things like that I see that I know were purchased. There's sort of a peach colored beaded thing that wraps in the front, not unlike the balloon dress that she wore in quite a few publicity shots that I know was purchased as well. But I'm betting money that top was purchased. And as for Bruce, I mean, a tuxedo, we would just go get, usually we would go get a tuxedo from one of the vendors that we shopped for him and bring it back. And Bruce didn't like to do fittings, by the way. He did not want to try on clothes. He didn't like the clothes, didn't want to try them on. We were fortunate in season 2, we found a tailor. And if we could get Bruce in, which we did before we started shooting the season, he would take measurements on Bruce and fit a suit on Bruce, and he would look at him And I could bring the suit to the tailor, his name was Ray, and say, Ray, make for Bruce. And Ray would measure it. And he'd say, okay, Bruce, okay, Bruce. He had very little English. He was so sweet. And he would alter those suits and they would fit. He was amazing. And that was kind of how we did it. Robert, on another note, Robert, when we did finally have moments, which were few and far between, where we could set up the episode, say, this is going to be change number 1, change 2, 3. Robert was very good about going through the line with me and choosing the pieces that he wanted for particular scenes. And then I would just put it in a bag and I would write the notes on it and to tag it. And I would take it to the set guy, Charles. And I would say, this is your costume breakdown. And here are the clothes for that breakdown. And that was pretty much the way it was. The only time I remember hearing from Bruce, other than when he would say how much he didn't like the clothes, was when something didn't fit. And I understood that when something didn't fit, that could be annoying. But when we got Ray, that became less and less and less. It was really more about, as he said to me one day, I look like an effing dentist in this outfit. And it's not up to me, I'm not the head of the studio. So, yeah.
In season 1, Bruce's Medicate Me shirt, is there a story behind it?
I don't remember a specific one. I will, having thought about that a little bit, at that particular time in the world, there was a lot of medicating of children going on, and when people were taking certain drugs to control their personality or moods or whatever, they would often say, well, I'm medicated. And that was kind of a phrase that was popular at the time. There were people that had children that had ADD and they were taking Ritalin or whatever that drug was. And, they would refer to them as children who were on medication. And I think because that was like a pop phrase is where that came from, the medicate me thing. I can't imagine we put that on there without Glenn having approved it.
A popular item. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
A popular item is the heart-adorned boxer shorts that Bruce, with the pig earring he wears in the episode Witness for the Execution, which is towards the end of the second season. What do you remember about the boxer shorts? Because they were popular among some of the male employees too. And you did talk a little bit about this already.
I think, if I remember correctly, I don't know where the idea came from, but with Robert, he was real big on being hands-on with that stuff. And it wasn't the kind of thing you could just go find in a store. So we would get the boxers and then we would draw the hearts and cut them out. And then the workroom would apply them. This is stuff called iron-on Pellon, and it's like glue. You put it between two pieces of fabric and apply a hot iron in it, and it glues the outer piece to the underpiece. And that was how we did that.
A question about the black dresses in Lady in the Iron Mask. I know you talked a little bit about this. How did you feel seeing all these dresses being ruined at the end of by the soap? But you said that they weren't really ruined, right?
They weren't really ruined because those soap suds were just that, and they were made out of polyester. And that I remember those dresses. They were just polyester. Throw it in the washing machine and pull it out. And it was not expensive fabric because we had to make so many of them.
Mm-hmm.
We'd love to know how Bruce reacted to knowing he would be wearing a dress. Did he mind it? What other things were fun or interesting to share about that episode?
I have to say, I think Bruce, he really is an actor. And I think he had a lot of respect for Glenn and the story. I don't remember any pushback. I like I said earlier with Ki as stunt double when we were fitting the girdle for the body pads and stuff like that. We made one for Ki and then we copied it and we made one for Bruce. I don't remember any pushback from Bruce at all on that because I think he really did. He got it. He got it that this was part of the joke. It was part of the laugh. It was, and that's what made the show. So I don't remember anything bad about that.
You talked about Judd Nelson guest starring in the episode Camille with Whoopi Goldberg. You had said that his costumes were some of Bruce's costumes, correct?
They were things literally that we pulled from season 1, because that was now in season 2. And we went back to, because Judd Nelson's size was very much what Bruce was in season 1. And we had a good amount of stock left over from season 1. And everything for Bruce and Cybill that we used, whether it was from a previous season or not, at that time, we kept it in one place. We had like a whole Bruce section and a whole Cybill section. And we kept it all in one place. So it was easy for us to go in and pick through it. And a lot of it was, so, as I had said earlier, soft textures and everything, that it was easy to not remember it by that time. You know, it was easy. No, I don't think anybody would look at that clothes Judd Nelson wore. Oh, Bruce wore that in season 1. But we had run out of time. I don't think we got to see Judd until 10 or 11 o'clock at night, the night before he worked. It was either very, very late that night, or it was the next morning before he went to the set. They brought him to us in costumes to fit. We really had no time with him.
Can you talk about the use of the royal blue dress Maddie wore in the dream sequence of Big Man on Mulberry Street in season 3? Fans noticed that she never wears that color in the office.
Robert Turteries did not like blue. Robert would say to Susie and I that he felt that blue grabbed. Now, back in those days, we shot all television on film, not digital video like they do now. And he felt that blue, any shade of, would grab in the film, and that unless the film was developed and everything properly and lit properly, that he didn't like the way it photographed. He didn't like the way he felt it took over the frame. Robert also didn't want to use on Moonlighting any primary colors. That's why when you look at the show, everything is really a dulled down color. It's pastels and what have you. My partner, Ken, who was very much in the world of fashion at the time Moonlighting was beginning, and he worked in a women's clothing store, a high-end women's clothing store. He told me he saw Moonlighting. He was a huge fan of the show. And he said that show single-handedly changed the colorway in women's fashions, because when Moonlighting came on, women's clothes were in jewel tones. Yeah. It was like, the mid-1980s, there were a lot of jewel tones. And Moonlighting, we used all those pastels, and it ushered in a new era in women's clothes. And Robert brought in pastels with that show. Did that answer the question? Oh, let me go back. I'm sorry, I just forgot the question. The blue in that sequence, when we got out of the Moonlighting world, and on that particular show, which I have to be honest with you, I do not remember making that show at all. Even though I did it, I remember nothing about it. When we got out of the real world, when we got out of Maddie and David's world, out of the Blue Moon world, Robert would like to use things like that. And there was one episode, I'm trying to remember which one it was, where Robert actually had us use jewel tones. And I remember and I wish I could remember which one it was. We used jewel tones, and I was so blown away. But when we got out of the reality, like Atomic Shakespeare, we got out of reality, and we used a lot of colors in Atomic Shakespeare. But for that, it was like a dream. It was another world. It was not reality. It had nothing really to do with Blue Moon. Why he used blue, I'm really not sure. I'm really not sure. Again, I do not remember that episode at all. That was the episode I think we were doing when we were prepping Atomic Shakespeare, if I'm not mistaken. That was the show we were doing when we did Atomic Shakespeare. So my mind was way into that at that point, because we had a lot of work cut out for us.
Cybill wore a beautiful beaded aqua dress in The Sun Also Rises. It's the first season, the first episode of the 3rd season. We all love the scooped out back. What do you remember about that design?
I think it was something that Robert purchased. I don't think it was anything that he made. I remember seeing something about this on the Facebook page about it being blue. When I went to that episode and I found that sequence, that top first appears in the car where she and David are driving to the party for his dad's engagement. And I remember thinking when I saw it, oh my God, that really is blue. That's so unlike Robert. When you get out of the car and you cut to them entering the house for the party, it finally is under different light. And what had happened with that costume, it was a color that Robert liked, and he called it aqua, which really was like a blue-green.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that happened with that particular dress, their top, because it was a top with a silk skirt, the thing that happened with that, the beading that was used on that acted like a prism. You know how a prism is? You hit it with light and then the rainbow comes out the other side.
Mm-hmm.
The beads on that, when the light hit it, it was causing this prism effect on the back of the dress and amongst the other beads. That was what I took from it, because as I watched it, I was even taken aback. But I noticed as she continues on in the sequence at that party, it appeared to have almost this sort of opalescence quality to it if you look really closely. At least on my television, it did. But I think that was just one of those things. It was like a freak of nature. It was something Robert saw. He loved it. I could guarantee you that skirt was made to go with that top. That top might have even been part of a dress, and he decided he didn't want the skirt. He just wanted to use the upper portion of it. And I also think it's just one of those things that once it got on film and got on camera, it was like, oh, wow, that's what happens, you know.
Okay.
What were the inspirations for Elise?
Wow. There was a designer at the time, and I believe her name was Liza Adzer. She was very famous. There was a whole thing in the 80s with a lot of that bohemian loose fitting kind of clothing with big chunky jewelry. And that, I believe, was Robert's inspiration for that. Because if you look at the first season of her, it's layer upon layer upon layer. It's scarves, it's turtlenecks, and it's jumpers and things like that. And Liza Adzer was very much that. It was all this kind of loose fitting, bohemian. That's the word I would use, bohemian kind of thing. And it was a way for Robert to give a woman another look on the show and have it still be attractive and have it still be interesting, but not anywhere in imitation of what Cybill was wearing, if that makes sense. And if you remember her character was really unique, and it really did suit that character. He really did hit the nail on the head with her, I have to say.
Okay. Well, Joy, I'll take over actually, okay, for the rest of it. Now, how did the collaboration go with the costume designer Robert Tudor-Reese, Cybill and Bruce, to bring an episode vision to life? And you mentioned about Cybill's wardrobe, because she was a rich model, that Robert thought she needed to be dressed a certain way.
Well, I think, you know, I don't know what either of you experiences is in the business, but one of the things that I've learned in my having been in the business is when you get a show and you hire somebody like a Charlize Theron or a Nicole Kidman or a Julia Roberts or Cybill Shepherd, the studios are paying for that face. They're paying for that beauty. They're paying for that charisma that those actresses, and I'm going to go with the women because a lot of the men, especially then, were running the studios. They're paying for that face. I think if you look at most movies where you've got a major star, like one of those ladies I just mentioned, and they ever get beat up, you're never going to see a big gash across their face. It's always a very intently placed wound somewhere, not to intrude on their overall beauty. So that being said, you know, Cybill, from what I understood, and I think Glenn might have even said it, that he had her in mind when he was writing the pilot for Moonlighting. She was like his muse in his head for the pilot. And there's no doubting that she's a beautiful woman, and she had been a model. And she comes onto the show, and she's supposed to be this model with this very elegant home, and she's got all these investments and everything. I think it really was just an interpretation of carrying that elegance and beauty another step further. Back in those days, I don't think people wanted to see a jeans and t-shirt Cybill Shepherd. They didn't want to see even a blouse and slack Cybill Shepherd. I think she did wear pants, I think, a few times in the show. I don't remember very many,
Mhm.
but she was always, I mean, my one of my favorite outfits on the whole show is in the pilot when she marches in and she says, "I'm closing the blue moon down." And it's that
Mhm.
camel colored cape coat with that blouse and skirt that she wears. And the way that it moves when she walks down the hall and those
Mhm.
sunglasses. And it just all was such beautiful and elegant.
Mhm.
And I think that Glenn really wanted to play to that part of the character. Here's this woman who's, it's like, I'm going to use this example again. How many times have we seen Sophia Loren not look elegant? People like that not look elegant. And I just, I think it was one of the ways of selling. And then they had Bruce, who had this real cutting edge personality to pivot against her glamour and her beauty. So I don't know. I mean, I remember doing the pilot and Robert doing sketches and picking out the clothes, and they really were quite elegant and beautiful, all of them.
Another thing about what Cybill wore as Maddie Hayes was her jewelry. That also got a lot of attention. Her cuffs, her necklaces, her earrings.
Robert loved jewelry. I would say if Robert had a hobby, it was jewelry. There were nights when we first started the show, we would be waiting for casting. We had this little office in the beginning. And Robert would get bored and he would literally go out to the shelves and take the jewelry boxes off the shelves, bring them in, put them on his desk, and he would sit there and he would go through the jewelry boxes and play with the jewelry. Literally. He loved jewelry. Cybill did not have pierced ears. I don't know if she does now, but she did not when we were doing the show, which was kind of a problem because all of her earrings had to be clip-on.
Mm-hmm.
And if we couldn't find clip-on and we found pierced earrings, we would have to find a jeweler that could convert them to clip-on. So we'll also in between takes, like when they would say, cut, go take a break, we're going to set for another shot. She would do this, pull them off, set them down. That was a thing that Susie and I learned on the pilot because when we were doing the rooftop sequence, like on the Eastern building, she lost them a couple of times and we only had X amount of pairs of those earrings. And earrings are important because when they're right here on your face, you see them, take after take after take. And that was when I say to you that I had to get up in the morning and go shopping. It was usually to go get more earrings for Cybill so that I could have them on the set that night. And I think we bought them back then at the May Company. A lot of that stuff came from there. It was very much in fashion at the time. Kind of buttony sort of earrings and stuff like that. But getting enough of them. And I remember Jay got mad at Susie one day and me. And he said, while we were on the Eastern building, just go get more damn earrings. He was like, we don't want to wait for anybody to have to look at them or look for them on the set. She didn't. As far as the other jewelry for her went, he was always on the lookout for somebody new. It wasn't unusual. Back then, there were people who specialized in servicing costume departments with jewelry. These ladies would have their own small companies, and I think they would buy things wholesale. They would go to these different jewelry manufacturers and get things wholesale, and they would have like a trunk, and they would come into the costume department. They'd call us and make an appointment and come in, and they would show their wares, and Robert and Susie would go through it with them. We would buy things. Robert would also, on a coming up episode, it was nothing for him to go through the Saks Fifth Avenue costume jewelry department and buy things, put together a bunch of things. There was a store that he really loved. I don't remember if I ever went in it or not. It was called Ciros, C-I-R-O-S. It was in Beverly Hills. And they had some really remarkable costume jewelry. It wasn't cheap, but it was remarkable looking. It was his thing. It was like his little hobby. He loved the costume design thing. But when it came to jewelry, he loved playing with some jewelry.
Yeah, it's like pieces of art. It's like wearable pieces of art.
Wearable art.
Now, a fan asks, she's curious about the decisions to repeat clothing and how those decisions were made. Also, why sometimes the dress Maddie wore would reappear but would look slightly different, like without the previous belt or jacket. It's very realistic, but just curious about the thought process behind those decisions in general when dressing someone.
I'm not going to go out on a limb, but I will tell you this. The climate that we were working, as I had described, was really hectic and sometimes chaotic. It was a lot of physical work. Working a 15-hour day for us was not unusual. There's a hotel just down the street from 9911 West Pico where our costume department was. I think it's at the corner of Beverly and Pico. There's like a 20-story hotel there. It wasn't unusual for me to go there at 1 a.m. and get a room and sleep for 4 or 5 hours and get up in the morning and shower, put the same dirty clothes back on, and go right back to the costume department. That happened every couple of months. I would have to do that, sometimes 2 or 3 nights. We were exhausted, and there were times when push came to shove, and Robert would say, or Susie would say, Robert, we have these dresses that we used 5 or 6 episodes ago. They already exist. We can change them up. We can put it with a different jacket. We can, we can re-trim the blouse or whatever we're going to do. And it was just one of those, it was like the constraints of time. It was the constraints of time that we would do. And I have to tell you, I really think that was a reason. And it would usually be something that he liked, because I do know Robert, if he, it happened to me once. I bought a sport coat for a character while he was working in San Francisco. And when he saw it on camera, he said, why did you buy that sport coat? And I said, because we had to have 5 and the guy's big and that's all I could get. And it was like an oatmeal colored sport coat. And we never, and it was from the first season, we never used that sport coat again the whole time I was there, even though we had 5 in perfectly good condition. So I think if he really liked something, he would envision a way to what is the word I'm looking for? Sort of redo it and make it work.
Yeah, repurpose it, reimagine it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Now, you kind of touched upon this, but what was Moonlighting's influence on fashion back then?
Well, I think it had a lot of influence on fashion. I think for men, even more than Bruce might want to admit, he did look elegant. He did. I mean, I have to say this for Bruce. He had an amazing physique. He really did. And he did know how to wear clothes. And when I look at the old episodes now, I'm real happy to see that he did know how to wear a suit. He didn't, it wasn't all hanging off the back of him, and he didn't have it all slumped over. He knew how to stand in a suit. He knew how to wear clothes. We did buy elegant clothes for him. I think with Cybill. I remember when we did season 1, there was a store still there in Beverly Hills. It's called Susanna of Beverly Hills. This little lady, Susanna, who owns it actually, is still in business. And it was quite the deal going in there. And she made everything in her store. So Robert could go in and he could choose a style and choose a fabric, and she could run it up for us. And that was pretty much how we got a lot of her clothes in season 1. And Robert really wanted to do that pastel thing. And she had access to lots of pastel fabrics and colors. And that's kind of how that got all off and running. But I think we had a lot of influence on what happened with fashion. Again, like I said, my partner Ken, who was in the fashion business at that time, noticed the change that we went from jewel tones, which are much brighter, to the pastels, particularly for women's.
Now, some of the outfits seem to have been worn on the red carpet, especially by Cybill. Did she get permission, like the black velvet gown that she wore in the dream sequence? Always rings twice. That looks like the gown she wore at the 85 Emmy Awards.
Yes. I don't know if we needed to get permission from that. Usually that request would come through. I'm imagining Cybill would see Susie on the set in the morning and say, hey, that black dress, I'm going to the Emmys. Can I borrow it? I want to use it for that. I think Robert was quite flattered to be able to have her wear it again. I think that that time you're speaking of, she wore red Reebok sneakers with it, if I'm not mistaken, to the Emmys on the red carpet. That did not make him happy. But I think everything, because it was ABC Circle and because we were right there in the building with those people, and it was a very different time, there was far less corporate rigidity within the company, for lack of a better way to describe it. And I think that the production, I think ABC was happy that, it wasn't coming out of a publicity budget. They weren't coming to ABC and saying, I need $10,000 for some clothes to wear, on the red carpet. We had things that were already paid for that they could wear and were recognizable. And they knew, the network knew it. So, and they knew that it looked good. So I think that they were reassured. But a formal request, I don't remember.
Now, do you have any favorite fashion moments from the show?
I would say my favorite fashion moments from the show are that change where she comes to fire David and close the blue moon in the pilot.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that was a purchased jacket, by the way. That jacket was bought.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when that costume came together, I was just floored. It was reminiscent of a costume that Diana Ross wore in the movie Mahogany when she's first being presented to the cosmetics company as the face of the cosmetics company.
Mm-hmm.
And Diana Ross walks in with this beautiful hat and top and a cape and skirt. It reminded me a lot of that costume, the elegance and the simplicity of it. That was probably one of my favorite moments. I would say with Bruce, there's a famous publicity photo of he and Cybill together, and she's in like a lavender outfit and he's in a light gray sport coat. And they're like chest to chest and the faces are together and they're facing the camera. Every time I see that, it makes me smile because I really like the lightness of that jacket and the texture that was there. I thought he looked particularly elegant when we did the casino episode with that cream wool dinner jacket. If I remember correctly, he didn't wear black formal pants with that. If I remember correctly, he wore charcoal gray pants that we trimmed up to be tuxedo pants. They were like dark gray, not black. That I would say is another one of my favorite moments with him in the show because I thought it was particularly elegant.
Okay. And last question, what are your thoughts about the show 40 years later?
I want to say thank you to you for reaching out to me because you doing that has prompted me to look at the show again. Having looked at the show at this stage of my life and remembering what I remember, it's like seeing a whole new thing. Bruce and Cybill are far more talented than I ever gave them credit for being. Again, I was 28 years old when I started the show. I was 30 when I left. I was very young. I was very inexperienced. It was my first big job. I'm really, really proud of the show and the way that it turned out. I'm grateful that I had the opportunity to work with the people that I did on that show. Glenn Caron, Jay Daniel, Bob Butler, the other directors. But I really have to give kudos to Glenn Caron because he was always very generous with Susie and I and Robert, and he was always appreciative and understood the importance of our work. And that isn't always the case in the film industry. So when I look back on it, I actually have a hard time looking at some of the episodes because it almost makes me cry. Because as difficult as it was doing the show back then with all the crazy hours we were working and all of that, I knew then that we were doing something special. And just the efforts that you guys have put into this fan club and your Facebook page and everything is living proof of that we were doing something special. And I'm so grateful to have had the opportunity to contribute and be a part of it. So, I have to tell you, I'm trying to think of the people on the show, the people that were part of the crew, people that weren't in front of the camera. Suzanne Gangursky, I'm sure you guys know who she is. And there's one of the women, the post-production supervisor,
Cheryl Main. Yes.
Cheryl Main. Yep. I loved Cheryl Main. We used to run into each other at the studio and have a great laugh together and everything. And I remember Skip Bodine. I remember Jimmy Simons. They were our first ADs and how wonderful they were. It was a wonderful, wonderful group of people. It really was. It was like family. And when I left, it was really hard because I'll never forget the first job I did after leaving that show. I wasn't with family. And I remember feeling so lonely because we didn't have the camaraderie that we had on Moonlighting. It wasn't there. And it really brought it home to me that how spoiled I had been for that 2.5, 3 years that I was on Moonlighting and working with those people. So, yeah. And I think I mentioned to you, Diana, I'd also done a movie with Glenn after called Clean and Sober that he directed. That was another way for me to get to know him and appreciate him as well.
Mm-hmm.
I also have a very different perspective on Bruce and Cybill.
Yeah, there was some, one of the other questions that was asked actually was what were their personalities? Were there any changes in personalities that you see?
I think we all have to remember the time. It was 1984, 1985, 1986. Bruce became an overnight sensation, and I mean an overnight sensation. Cybill had been famous, and she was becoming famous yet again. There was all this fame and fortune to be had from the show, and the attention it was getting, and the kudos it was getting. Everybody was exhausted. Everybody was working hard. Everybody was tired. We were all up against it in our own way, trying to do the best we could to contribute under extenuating circumstances. And Glenn's mentioned this. I'm not saying anything out of turn. He's absolutely right. It was. When you get people that exhausted and that tired, your best personality doesn't always come out. It doesn't always come across. I'm just grateful that now I can look back on it and understand better, having seen the shows and everything. They had a hard job. They had a really hard job. I do feel, people say, did they get along? I always thought they were like a little boy and a little girl, brother and sister. They would have their little bickerings, but if anybody went after Bruce, Cybill was there to defend him. And if anybody went after Cybill, Bruce was there to defend her. And I think they were both smart enough to know that what they had together as a team was important, not unlike Laurel and Hardy, Rowan and Martin, and all those great duos that generated so much laughter. I'm not going to say that they were the easiest to deal with, because they certainly weren't. But I've worked with a lot worse, I can say that. So, and now, like I said, I'm a lot older. Bruce is a lot older. Cybill's a lot older. Looking back on it, it was a situation. It was a situation in time.
No, and they were lightning in a bottle. And I don't think they've ever worked with a co-star since that has such chemistry and such an iconic couple, TV couple. Even if they were in the movies, they would have been huge if they were doing movies.
I agree. But I do think that I think the magic was Glenn and the two of them together. It was like a magic potion. When I see that, I think they would have had great careers without that show. I think Bruce would have been a star, but I think that what they both learned from that experience and took away from that experience only benefited them in the future.
And the writing, you have to, the script, if it's not on the page. Well,
that's why I say Glenn, because I know there were many writers. I know Jeff and Ron were there, and I know Roger Director was there. But in all fairness to them, where we were in our little department over at 9911 West Pico, which was not on the lot, those guys were all ensconced in the rooms on the lot at the end of the building where Glenn's office was. And a lot of that stuff was done behind closed doors. So we were never quite privy to it. So when we got the written page, we had no idea that a word or a phrase might have come for Ron or Jeff or Roger or whomever it came from. We didn't know that. We just know that anytime anything had to be handled from the script, it was either myself or Susie or Robert, and we went to Glenn. And generally it was Susie and I begging Robert, get on the phone and call Glenn right now, because we need to have an answer on this. We need to deal with this question. So that's, I don't take anything away from any of those people. Like I said, it was an amazing group of people and everybody contributed. It's just realized that we were in a separate geological location from them, our offices. They were at 20th Century Fox on the west side of Century City, and we were on the east side of Century City at the Pico.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. And we're so grateful that you took the time with us and that you're in our Facebook group and you're posting and you're enjoying your time there, reminiscing with everybody 40 years later.
Thank you guys for reaching out. I hope that this turned out good for the two of you.
It was great. Thank you.
Wonderful.
I'm glad. Anything else you guys need, don't hesitate to reach out.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care.
You
Have a good
too.
night. Thank you.
You too.